คุณทิมอยู่นั่นป้ามาช้าเพราะว่าลูกสาวป้าบอกสถานที่ผิดดีนะที่ป้ามาเห็นคุณทิมเมื่อกี้คุณทิมเดินไปห้องน้ำคุณทิมเดินไปห้องน้ำก็เลยได้ทักกับคุณทิมป้าเพิ่งรู้เมื่อกี้เขาจากตว่าคุณทิมมา NYU ป้าก็เลยรีบให้ลูกสาวลงทะเบียนให้แล้วก็รีบมาค่ะแล้วไม่ได้ชาร์จแบตด้วยแบตก็จะหมดโทรศัพท์อีกเครื่องหนึ่งของป้ามันแบตจะหมดค่ะโอ้ย
กูไปหยิบเป๋าก็บอกยังไง
ป้าดูในนั้นนะคุณทิมผมสั้นนะแต่ตัวจริงคุณทิมผมยาวแล้วอ่ะโอ้ยแล้วทำไงดีนะมันมือป้ามันสั่นนะสิเพราะว่ามันโอ้ยป้าจะลองไปนั่งตรงนี้
เราควรนั่งที่เดิม
น้องคนไทยเหรอคะ
นั่งคืนได้ไหม
ตรงนี้มีคนนั่งแล้วใช่ไหมคะ
น่าจะมีแล้ว
ค่ะป้าอยากวางโทรศัพท์ป้าไลฟ์ไปบ้านเรา
นี้ก็ได้มั้งครับเนี่ยวางตรงกลางโต๊ะไม่มีใครน่าจะยุ่งหรอกครับ
ได้ใช่ไหมคะ
น่าจะได้เลย
โอเคค่ะงั้นป้าจะวางตรงกลางงั้นป้าขอยืนตรงนี้ก่อนจนกว่าเจ้าของที่เขาเสียงดังเขาพูดกันเสียงดังมากนั่งตรงนี้นะเอาแก้วกาแฟไปไม่มีใครมาดูเลยป้าปิดไลท์แล้วนะคะ
Welcome to the final panel of the evening or the afternoon, and don't forget to stay after for a reception or some additional informal conversation. You have a program, so I'm not going to do the introduction of everyone here. Pete is going to lead off with the presentation, and then we're going to have a informal conversation both amongst the panelists and among people in the audience to address the kind of next set of questions, which is one step beyond a discussion of what's happening, but kind of what might we do, and what other voices need to be involved in this conversation. So,
thank you very much. What a day to be in New York. Today, 80 years ago, UN started. It was established 80 years ago exactly today, October 24th. Saturday will be early voting for the New York mayor election. And the day after will be ASEAN Summit, where a lot of leaders, including President Trump and all the prime ministers and presidents of Southeast Asia will meet in Kuala Lumpur. So just these three incidents that are happening today, tomorrow, and the day after, it brings a lot of discussion about the current state of democracy, the current state of Asia, the current state of America, the current state of human rights, which I definitely want to talk more in terms of the lessons that I had learned as the Prime Minister designated of the country, election winner, and now the post-parliamentarian, a byproduct of backsliding Thai style, and also effective strategies that we hope that maybe we spend the next 1 hour together to brainstorm with global voices of human rights and what the 21st century definition of human rights would mean. If it was my father, it would be the fight to be free. For me, my age is probably the fight to be heard. My daughter is probably the fight for something that we don't know what it is going to be like. But I think it's a good opportunity to really discuss the role of internationalism and human rights in the 21st century, and how do we make sure that we don't lose the youth. And I feel like that's happening all around the world, including here in America as well. So I think that would be the introduction that I leave the room with, and other panels to come in, and then we can see where it goes from there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Peter, for kicking us off. No small questions for anyone. So Asli, I think I would like to start with you, if we could. Peter made a reference to kind of effective strategies and kind of contemporary challenges. So I'm wondering if you could reflect on both challenges that you've seen both in Turkey, in your home country, now that you've been here in the US for about a decade, your work with AUP 2.5. Great.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Margaret and Sydney, thank you, John, for organizing this and inviting me. I think this is exactly the kind of thing we need at this moment, cross-regional, cross-institutional conversations, especially those of us who have experienced living in countries, working, studying countries that have gone through these processes of autocratization and erosion of higher education, have a lot to learn from each other and to also convey to our colleagues in the US. I mean, I've been in the US for a long time, and a lot of my experience is based here. But I think this is really valuable and extremely timely and urgent. And I can talk a little bit about Turkey. I think academic freedom, institutional autonomy has always been on shaky grounds, to be honest, in Turkey. Not really fully consolidated, but of course in the last decade or so, there has been tremendous attacks on higher education and pretty much complete loss of autonomy for institutions. The process started in 2015. This latest wave started in 2015 with intensified conflict in the Kurdish regions in the country, and this peace petition that 1,000+ academics initially signed, a second wave of 1,000+ academics signed, the second wave, and then many of those academics were fired and purged from their institutions. Many of them have faced criminal investigations. Many of them ended up leaving the country. In 2016, there was a coup attempt that further provided pretext for the AKP government to intensify the purges and persecution. And in the end, I think around 6,000 academics were purged beyond this petition wave. And then maybe 150,000 public servants were also purged. And I think Turkey lost a few thousand, I am not exactly sure about the numbers, few thousand academics who basically fled the country. And then one of the most prestigious universities in Turkey, Bosphorus University, kind of protected its own peace petition academics and then ended up being the last bastion of institutional autonomy and got the guide of the government in 2021, 2022, where you might have seen the images of Bosphorus University academics with their guards turning their backs on the rectoral building. And it became a symbol of academic freedom and institutional autonomy, but in the end, the government succeeded in appointing there has been a win in Turkey on the universities that they have been electing their own rectors, kind of electing their rectors, those that got the top votes would go to the Higher Education Council, then would go to the president, and one of those who got the most votes would be the rector. So that process has been completely vanished, and now it's a day, the Bosphorus University protest became a symbol but did not really succeed in protecting the institutional autonomy. And despite the emotional power of the protest that lasted, I think, over 3 years, that was not a social movement or a concerted action across universities during the purges or during the appointments. After 2016 coup attempt, all universities got appointed directors, and most of them just accepted it without making much noise. And I don't want to go on too long right now, but I think that's my starting point to think about what could be done more successfully, more efficiently. I don't think any of us can win this on our own. We cannot win this on our own in our own campuses. And I think we really need to start rethinking about what the university is. University is not just tenure track faculty as it was maybe in 1950s when we thought about, or some of our predecessors, I guess, thought about concepts like academic freedom. University has changed. And we need to think about different components of the university and how we build resistance with all those different components and beyond the university, within the communities in which we are based, and labor movement that we need to start seeing ourselves as part of. We are academic workforce, and we really, and fortunately, I guess, higher ed is one of the sectors in the United States where unionization has been going up, and really among especially graduate students, adjuncts, contingent faculty, there's a really pretty high density of unionization, which is one reason for some optimism. And I have a lot to say about that, but I'll stop for a minute. That's one, and then maybe go to it.
Great, and we will come back to both of those sorts of themes. Ken, you recently came out with a book, and reflecting back on kind of more perhaps at the global level for a moment, you can kind of throw out this challenge of how do we understand challenges to human rights in the 21st century. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on kind of at the current moment, how you see the terrain for the kind of interconnected elements of struggles for academic freedom, human rights, democracy.
Okay. Well, first, I mean, why are we even talking about academic freedom in the context of autocracy? It's because there is essentially an autocrat's playbook that every actual and would-be autocrat follows. It's not a literal book, but it may as well be because they all follow the exact same set of rules. And the aim is to chip and away at the checks and balances on executive power. And they do this really for two reasons. One is because elections are really just one part of democracy. You know, you vote every 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the country. What do you do in between times? You know, how do you affect what the government does in between elections? You know, the Singaporean answer is nothing. You know, you've elected us, leave us alone. But most democracies say you should be able to debate policy. You should be able to influence government in between. And how do you do that? Well, you do it through civil society, you do it through the media. But a big part is universities. You know, universities are bastions of expertise. They're where ideas are developed and debated. And so universities are an important input. But if you're an autocrat, you don't want that input because you already know everything you want to know. You know, and anybody who comes up with a contrary point of view is giving you the wrong answer. So, you know, universities are to be silenced, along with these other potential checks on executive power. The other big factor, obviously, is that, you know, most autocrats in the early stages at least feel compelled to hold periodic elections. And they try to have managed elections. The idea is you know, tilt the playing field sufficiently so that the autocrats can win. But you still have polling, you may count the votes accurately. But if you tilt things enough, the autocrat has a good chance of winning. And of course, if you can silence universities and silence the media and compromise the political parties and the like, it makes it much easier to win. Now, the difficulty is that even a managed democracy doesn't guarantee an autocrat's victory. And Turkey's a good example of this. You know, Erdogan, who has been very successful in retaining power, you know, suddenly is faced with this very charismatic opponent, Akram Imamoglu, who would probably win if there was an election. So he's in prison. That was a fairly crude way of trying to deal with what's left in managed democracy. Viktor Orban in Hungary also faces a very severe challenger, Peter Magyar. He has not locked up Magyar, and Magyar could win. And so, I'm sorry, yes. So the, what we're seeing is that governments that have tried managed democracy are increasingly resorting to zombie democracy, where they don't even go through the charade of a tilted playing field. They just completely shut down any meaningful opposition. And so that's what Putin did in Russia, that's Lukashenko in Belarus, that's Museveni in Uganda, or Ortega in Poland, in Nicaragua. But when you no longer have even the feigned legitimacy of a managed election, then you're holding power just by the barrel of the gun. And that's a very risky proposition because you no longer can claim that you're serving because of popular desire, you're just serving because you've got guns. And a good illustration of what happens is Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator. And when the HTS rebel group a year ago started advancing on Damascus, nobody came to Assad's defense. He had to flee to Moscow. So it's a dangerous proposition to have nothing like an election. But managed elections, even given the autocrat's playbook, are a dangerous proposition. Now, in this country, we're not yet at the point of a completely managed election, but that's where Trump is trying to go. That's why he has attacked universities, the media, he's threatening private foundations, he's threatening civil society. He is attacking regularly the judges, he's compromised the Republican members of the US Congress. And so we should be very aware of where this attack on academic freedom fits in within this broader plan. And I think that helps us devise strategies for fighting back.
Great, thank you so much. Now, Peter, if we can return to you and talk about perhaps in different dimensions of this, how it manifests in the case in Thailand these days, and kind of the lessons learned so far from the experiences that in the Move Forward Party and others in confronting autocratization.
Yes. If I can summarize the takeaway in a sentence of what happened in Thailand 2 years ago towards today in many places in the world is fast autocrats and slow institutions. That's something that is the conflict that is going on around the world. Whiplash, right? Muscle velocity, right? That's the autocrats' playbook of coming with quick executive powers, with fake news, with everything all the time. But our previous democratic institution is designed to be slow, deliberative, and consultative. And because of that, that's why we are facing the kind of backsliding that we are still a bit confused. Opposition strategies is still a bit murky on how we want to win back. Now, for case of Thailand, coming from I was a designated survivor, a rookie leader, 2 years into politics, then I had to lead the party to, win the election. The secret sauce is this. So we felt like autocrats can ban a man, but they cannot ban an idea. They can ban me, but they cannot ban the idea. But what's important is that the idea that comes out will be diffused with all these digital autocracy that they are trying to confuse you with, new things all the time. So how do you make sure that of the idea that you want to make sure that this is alternative Thailand, towards the autocratic Thailand. This is my vision for Thailand, but they will try to confuse people. They will try to create voter fatigue by design. So for us, the key is one word: voting turnout. Voting turnout will make sure, if the politics is sensational enough, and that people go to the polls. In my case, it was 76%. I was with Atush yesterday, and we were anticipating what the New York mayoral election voting outcome to be, and I understand it's below 50%, so that's mind-boggling to me, where if you hold elections and people don't come out to vote. But for us, the only reason why we won is the only regression analysis that shows correlation is voting turnout. 76 districts, 40 million people, all the districts, if they come out to vote, more than 70% we won. If it's lower than 70%, we lose, no matter how strong the candidate is, no matter how weak the competitor is, no matter how young the constituent is. It's that kind of sensational in terms of politics that we were trying to make sure that people show up to vote, and that's the success that I had, regardless of gerrymandering, regardless of independent organizations that are not very independent, regardless of judicial capture. But without the ability to mobilize people to come out, there was no way that I could win that election, coming from a rookie party.
Thank you. Also, you've worked a lot with the American Association of University Professors, and in your previous comments, we're starting to say, you know, we have to think about what the university is, right? We have workers, we are a workforce, and we also have students. Some of them are even in this room on a Friday afternoon. So I'm wondering how I don't think we maybe have talked as much about the intersection of work between faculty and students, and in kind of building alliances around issues of academic freedom. And maybe you could just reflect on some of your work with AAUP in general, and then also have there been some specific examples of kind of faculty, student, and administrator kind of collaborations that you think are promising?
I mean, pick up from your last sentence, administrators, I don't think they need to be pushed. They are not going to move on their own. So I think we need to start elsewhere to organize and to build power and to build solidarity so we can push the administrators to start to do the right thing. And this just happened with the compacts. I mean, all 7 universities out of the 9 that initially got the compacts rejected them, but they did not reject them because they suddenly grew courageous. They rejected them because in the first couple of cases there was really strong backlash from faculty, students, alumni, all different staff, and I think once a couple of them rejected it, it gave the others impetus, and honestly, I mean, maybe shame to accept them. I think we really need to keep pushing in our own institutions, pushing the administrators through various means to not comply, and especially not comply in advance. Going back to, I came to NY in 1998 as a graduate student, a PhD student. I think the year after I came, maybe that was the first union card drive for graduate students to organize, unionize. That was the first, I think the first private university maybe where graduate students were unionizing. There was a lot of union busting and a lot of heated debates, and we did win our union and we unionized, and then a couple of years later the Bush NLRB turned on, decided that graduate students are not employees, and the union was abolished, and then it came back a few years later, but I wasn't part of the unit anymore. But since then, over the last 20 years, graduate students have unionized across private universities, across public universities, and now I think they are close to 40% union density, which is quite impressive across any other sector in the US. Same with adjuncts and contingent faculty. There has been a really growing, fast-growing effort to unionize librarians, postdocs, researchers. So these are all elements of the university. At NYU, I think aside from tenure track faculty and administrators who are more managerial, almost everybody is unionized or in an effort to unionize. So there's that. And then there's AUP, and AUP chapters have been growing rapidly in the last couple of years, because I think we are all feeling the urgency of the situation, that we need to organize and we need to build an organized resistance. So our AUP chapter at NYU have, I think, quadrupled in the last year and a half, and new AUP chapters have emerged across universities where they didn't exist, or they disappeared over AFT, the Teachers and Nurses Union. So a lot of graduate students and contingent faculty are unionized with UAW, who has auto workers and other sectoral workers. So, so there are different ways in which I think we can build cross-sectorial networks and solidarity, especially beyond academia. And I don't think we should be going to the people and explaining them why democracy is good and why freedoms are good and what's the value of academic freedom. I think we need to start realizing our common interests and fight for those common interests together. I think as the more we show up for each other, the stronger our solidarity gets. And I think maybe another way to think about this is the attacks on academic freedom are part of a much bigger package, backsliding democracy, but also an attack on education in general. We have a lot of common ground with teachers, K-12 teachers. We have a lot of common ground with parents, right, who want their kids to be educated and educated well and in public institutions to have access to free public, high-quality public education. We also need to think about the inequalities built into the higher education, and this is mostly United States, but I think it applies to Turkey, for example. I'm suspecting it applies to many other countries that you know much better than me. But there's a lot of inequality built into higher education too, and there's public universities and private universities, and there are universities in the U.S. In states where unionization is completely out of the picture for public employees, and there's no outlet for that. And there are community colleges, and even within New York, which is a bit of a cosmos of all this diversity, I think there's maybe 200 institutions, degree-granting institutions, and they are so diverse, they don't look alike, and we share some challenges, and then there are a lot of other things that we need to rethink. I think one of the last comments in the previous panel was that we should not put the previous status quo as the goal ahead of us. I think we need to start thinking about what is higher education, public or public good like. How do we reconstruct higher education in a way that serves the public good and the common good, and how do we bring other allies into that fight? So I think that's my quick.
So if I could ask a quick follow-up and perhaps take a devil's advocate view to a certain extent. One is, so we know the assault on higher education predates Trump coming into office, right? Ron DeSantis in Florida and New College and many kind of pressures. This seems to be a somewhat, at least popular agenda, right? Elected officials before Trump became president. And that higher education does not have a robust constituency in support of it outside of higher education. That there wasn't that willingness to kind of support the assaults, to support higher education with respect to those assaults, because higher ed has a bad rap for any number. It's very expensive, professors are teaching crazy stuff, whatever. There isn't that constituency. And so I'm curious how you see where you just ended your comment is, you know, we have to be building alliances around common interests and so forth. Is there something, not that the Chris Rufo critique of higher ed has any, you know, resemblance to reality, but is there something that higher ed institutions and their members have to do differently in order to build a constituency that's broader than itself in defense of academic freedom?
I mean, it's something I continue to think about, so I don't really have a final answer to that, and I think it's a challenge for all of us, a work in progress. I think thinking about it in maybe local settings is more useful than thinking about it in abstract terms and in like really high levels of abstraction. I think in New York, our contract faculty union is part of UAW, and through UAW I started meeting, for example, workers in submarine manufacturing, which I have never ever crossed paths before. And I think finding these outlets where we can actually meet with people and talk to them about their issues, because we don't know their issues much either, and we don't really shows up for their issues as much either. And I don't think it's fair to expect them to show up for us unless we are there showing up for other people. So I think we need to start with asking people, hey, what are your issues? And, oh, these are our issues, and there's some overlap here between even though these issues might look different, academic freedom might not sound like something that's related to your life, but let's talk about it, and maybe we can see how these things coalesce and overlap at some point. So I think thinking about that local level is really important, and I'm thinking about it in terms of like cross-institutionally, we have been building a cross-institutional network with universities and colleges across the larger New York metro area. And there are like smaller schools there that are much better integrated into the communities where they are compared to some of the private Ivy League schools that are much more shut off. And I think they have a different relationship with their communities that we can learn from and maybe try to then model and emulate, and bringing in parents and talking to higher K-12 teachers, right? I mean, they have a different kind of relationship with their communities. So I think thinking about it at the kind of grassroots level, the neighborhood level, the local level is a better place to start than thinking about it in abstract terms, which is much harder to do, I think. And in New York, I think, again, I am in New York, so I know New York better, and maybe this is not applicable to other places, but there's such a density of higher ed institutions, and also we might have a relatively friendlier local government. So we have a really unique opportunity to build some kind of models of solidarity and networks and coalitions that can then maybe amended, but could also, be replicated elsewhere in other contexts.
Ken, I'm wondering if I could follow up on kind of lessons learned in the current conjuncture for the global human rights movement. It would seem to me, and excuse me if in advance if I seem to be continued contrarian in my questioning, but if we think about the rise of the global human rights movement, it occurred at a time when hegemonic powers at least were rhetorically committed to an idea of a liberal international order, and that period no longer really exists in the same way. And the global human rights movement relied on kind of a strategy of kind of naming and shaming, and that was a very effective kind of strategy. And I'm wondering if that strategy is still, from your perspective, is that still the dominant approach, or do there need to be different kinds of strategies and tactics for the human rights movement at this time?
This is what my book's about. Righting wrongs, if you want to look at it. But first, I think it's worth noting that the shaming was always one of basically two key tools of the human rights movement. The other was going to allied governments and getting them to impose diplomatic and economic costs on an abusive government. And so the idea is, one, you harm a government's reputation because everybody pretends to respect human rights, and even today. Second, every two-bit desperate still wants something from the international community, whether it's arms sales or preferential trade benefits or an invitation to some fancy summit. Whatever it is, you can deprive them of that if they don't behave about it. And those are the aims of the human rights movement. Those tools are still very much in place. Now, with shaming, there obviously are certain issues that are harder. If you go to Viktor Orban and say, you're mistreating migrants, he'll say, of course I am. That's my platform, But, mistreatment of migrants was less popular in Brussels. And so we were able to go to the European Union and get it to condition these huge subsidies given to Hungary on what's known as better respect for the rule of law. That's, EU's for, better rights standards. With somebody like Trump, if you go to him and say, you're violating human rights, you kind of stir and say, what are those? But Trump is very shaming. And I think some of the big movements that we've seen with respect to Gaza and Ukraine are a product of shaming Trump. Because what does he care about? He sees himself as this master negotiator. His book was The Art of the Deal. This guy can, close a deal any place. And when looked as if he was being bamboozled by the likes of Netanyahu in Gaza or Putin in Ukraine. Ultimately, he was getting enough press about that he was shifting. And so, why did he shift on Gaza? It's partly that Netanyahu had so much chutzpah that he tried to attack the Hamas negotiators in Qatar. And that was a step too far for the Gulf Arab leaders. And these are people that Trump listens to because they're rich and autocratic. They're his countries. But part of it is that because of the intense media attention to Israel's genocide in Gaza, that even MAGA Republicans were having disquiet about all of this. There are polls showing that young Christian evangelicals, the heart of Trump's base, were Trump. And so, with Trump, it's all about Trump. Whatever's in his self-interest is what guides him. But you could say really it was shaming that helped nudge him to finally put the screws on Netanyahu and say, you are going to agree to this ceasefire, even though you're not getting your maximalist position. You're not getting the mass ethnic cleansing of Gaza. You're not solving the Israeli-Palestinian problem by getting rid of the Palestinians. You're not even getting rid of Hamas entirely. So that, I think was quite successful. It's still a work in progress. But I actually think, Trump so brought the accolades of having gotten this deal that he's going to enforce it. I really don't think there's going to be an open return to China. There may be, brief conflicts, but I think Trump now has this interest in keeping this going. And then the big question is, because he wants the stabilization force in Gaza, because he wants, somebody to rebuild Gaza, the likely suppliers of those troops and arms are insisting on a Palestinian state. And will this push Trump to push that far? He's uniquely able to do this because, if a Democrat did this, he'd be pilloried by the right. But Trump owns the right, so he can do whatever he wants. Nobody's going to attack him. On Ukraine, similarly, he came in, Putin was his best buddy. Putin could do no wrong. He was basically reading Kremlin talking points. And because he was so ridiculed for, after every meeting with Putin, emerging with whatever the Kremlin line was, then he finally realized he had to do something. And now, for the first time in his presidency, he's imposed sanctions on the two leading oil companies, which is a serious factor. He may send Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. So, these show that shaming, if properly focused, still can make a difference. I think the question, for the purpose of the conference here is, what kind of shaming would be useful with respect to defending academic freedom? And, I do think that, universities do have to do a better job of selling themselves. I think this critique of insufficient ideological diversity is probably a fair critique. The answer to that is not government censorship. The answer to that is better self-policing. But that's probably a fair point. But the universities right now are not really explaining, what is a lack of NIH grants mean? Well, it means that the next round of medical advances that could prevent cancer or what have you, are not being taken for lack of funding. How are we in this great kind of economic fight for technological advancement when suddenly the U.S. funding that has underwritten a lot of the basic science and basic technological investigative work is no longer there? So I think there are ways that make it not about just elite university. Nobody's going to go to that for home, but that make it more about what's in our self-interest. And Trump, who is good at talking about our interests, but bad at actually enforcing it rather than pursuing his own or his cronies, showing that he is actually undermining things that universities deliver of value to society, to all of us. I think that's going to be a big part of the step forward.
That's great. Peter, I'm wondering if you can talk about, since we're talking about building alliances and coalitions, kind of how do you see the role, particularly of the diaspora community, of ties with respect to the struggle for democracy back home?
I actually want to branch out to international scrutiny.
Excellent.
International scrutiny in terms of what you have been talking about, trying to connect the dots and build the momentum. I think first thing on academic and democratic backsliding. So I spent a lot of time grooming misgen leaders because I got banned for 10 years by the military. So I spent a lot of time at the Harvard Kennedy School. It's more practical, obviously. Teaching them how to run for public office without compromising their bank account or values. I believe that if you have fresh blood into a system, even the structure is poor. But if you have new politicians going in all the time, whether it's Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, a lot from Singapore as well, they come to me with their campaign craft plans. Like when they graduate, they want to return home and run political office. The question that I get asked the most was, how much does it cost to start a political party? And guess which country of these students asked me the most? Philippines and Indonesia. A whole bunch of them, they come in, they don't show me the campaign craft like any other, like India and things. They were like, how much does it cost to start a political party? Because none of them align with my values in Philippines and Indonesia. So I think that's one role that I'm trying to do, even if they ban me from running for public office or being a player myself, but I can be a coach and groom next gen leaders for ASEAN when I have the time. The second point about international scrutiny, I'm going to tell you pretty concisely of what can be done to help a competitive autocracy without interfering in domestic politics. First thing is call in. Second thing is call out. Third thing is condition. Fourth thing is courts, and I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Call in is because within Asia, you don't want to condemn or you don't want to shame. You might go behind closed doors and you talk about, this is not going to be good for you because of this and that. That's like the minimum that democracies and human rights as a universal value without borders can do for one another, which a lot of Europeans, Australians, and Americans were trying to help us during the time. They were trying to talk with someone that I couldn't talk with, friends of Thailand kind of thing. Call out is like condemnation. So that's the second thing that if it goes to a certain extent that is out of bound or ill proportionate, then countries can call out that this is not acceptable. Election in Myanmar on December 28th, under such a martial condition is unacceptable, and I hope they say that in the ASEAN summit that is coming up, for example. Condition, this is getting a little bit stickier. Free trade agreements between Europe and ASEAN, free trade agreement between Europe and Asia. Human rights as part of that free trade agreement is going to be quite effective. Harder to do, but going to be quite effective. And the last thing was one of the things that I wanted to do if I became the Prime Minister at the time, is Magnitsky Act. Global Magnitsky Act alignment. I think that will help the entire ASEAN. That will help the stamp operation.
Peter, maybe you could explain for people who don't know exactly what...
It's named after the Russian lawyer who's trying to expose corruption. So in many countries except for America and Europe and Australia and Japan and South Korea, you can only do sanctions, targeted sanctions on, you cannot do it on human rights abuse. You cannot do it on corruption. But because of the existence of Magnitsky Act, countries can finally, seize assets and do targeted sanctions of the human rights violator. And I wanted to do it for Thailand also because in order for Thailand to help Myanmar, without this we cannot do. There's no legal basis for me to stop money from going from Thailand to junta, whether it's oil, whether it's gem or not. So that was one thing that I felt like if ASEAN has a global, a regional Magnitsky alignment with the same database with the rest of the world, I feel like this is human rights with teeth, finally. It's not just statements, finally. It's finally something that we can do, and we saw that happening in Cambodia from the US, from the UK, and South Korea on the same time. So finally, human rights and human trafficking that comes with scams. Finally, you could stop it with some practical results. Those are the things that I feel like that's a basis of international scrutiny from call in, call out, condition in your engagement, and then court, which is the Magnitsky Act. Thank you.
All right. So maybe we could open up the conversation to some questions from the audience, and I'll reserve my authoritarian moderator's prerogative to throw in my own question, whatever. And I think we'll try to do the same as before. We'll take 2 or 3 questions. And so I see Ashu to the person over here. All the way in the back. Yep.
So, My question is about.
All the way back.
My question is about whether a tradition of military interference in politics creates special challenges for crafting effective strategies to reverse democratic backsliding, as compared to situations where military interference in domestic politics is rare or does not exist. Now, of course, it's being tried here now, we know, but there is no tradition of that. Whereas Thailand and Turkey, according to political science, have had a tradition of a lot of military interference. So, we don't know where Trump's plan to involve the military in domestic politics, how far will it go? We don't know, but let's put that aside for a moment. There's no tradition yet. Both in Thailand and Turkey, does it create very special obstacles to reversing this backsliding?
All the way in the back.
Hi, so earlier on, we all talked about kind of the importance of voting in terms of democracy and trying to prevent authoritarianism. And so I'm very much of the opinion that increased turnout and accessibility for people across socioeconomic backgrounds is super important for the outcome of democracy. But how might you all respond to someone who's on the other side of that, who only believes that democratic participation should be accessible to people of higher socioeconomic backgrounds or education backgrounds?
John Stewart.
And was there one more, I think? Yep.
Hi, my name is Nas. I'm a student here at NYU program. I want to ask a question to Pita directly. It's a bit personal question for me. Looking back at your political and campaign journey, especially in terms of political campaign strategy, is there anything that you wish you'd change back then? And also, I have a second question. As an Indonesian who's also basically fighting the democratic backsliding in Indonesia, right? Is there anything that you'd like to share to us? Any lesson learned from Thailand that we can also use in Indonesia? Thank you.
Maybe we can start with the military intervention question first and then move on to the other.
The short answer is yes, it becomes very tricky. After 13 military coups in 100 years, then the normalization of coups becomes something that's always on the table. The military is smarter. So from generals, they move to judges. So from warfare becomes lawfare. Violence on the street becomes violence in the courtroom. So it's becoming a lot more discreet, and that's why I'm here instead of the government house. Autocrats are becoming more discreet. However, during the election campaign, all the military dense, heavy districts, we want landslide. So it's about winning election and domination of ideas with all these army, that your job is to prevent the country from external threat, but never mingle with internal affairs of the country. And I kept repeating that and campaigning inside the army camps and things like that, and it jived with them. So we want landslide in the military dense district. Hard on a macro level, but on the micro level, we have hope of dominating ideas of military. The role is to prevent external threats, but never mingle with the internal affairs of the country.
I would add to this that if you look around at the military-dominated governments that have actually democratized, external pressure is often a key factor. That was certainly the case with Turkey. There was a long tradition of military coups against every moderate Islamist government. And the key was actually the possibility of European Union sanction, which pushed Erdogan to the point that he was still an ally with Gulen to basically use the courts to subordinate the military successfully. Not nefarious trials, but they would have these mass trials that basically ended the military effect. If you look at Brazil, Argentina, Chile, when they all had very significant international pressure, tacked on to the domestic pressure for democracy that ended up, largely getting rid of that military. These are not real, ongoing problems today. On the contrary, look at a place like Pakistan, where, most recently Imran Khan was just dumped by the international community because he was seen as too anti-Western. And so, the West was quite happy having a military government. It was just more reliable as an ally. So I think that suggests that it's always going to be foremost domestic desire for democracy, but I think that that's pretty pervasive. But then the role of the stance of the international community makes a big difference, and we shouldn't neglect that. I think one of the problems Thailand faces is that the international community is kind of ambivalent about military rule. They're not so unhappy with it, and which is why the military keeps getting away with it.
Yeah, I think maybe the Turkish case is interesting, and I don't know, there might be maybe lessons to think about there that could be useful for other places. I guess the subduing of the military in a way, and the exerting more civilian control over the military did not really go hand in hand with democratization. I think it has, in fact, that assumption that civilian control over military is a step toward democratization in the Turkish case did not really quite play out that way, and backsliding happened at the same time as the military was kind of like tamed and subdued through legal and court routes. And I think maybe that's something to think about, like that doesn't necessarily, those two things might not necessarily go hand in hand. And in fact, I think the 2016 coup attempt was quite, unexpected and unforeseen for many, and it was really a kind of infighting between Erdogan and AKP and the Gulen movement. But aside from that, that created even further pretext for purging the military and appointing loyal officers to all ranks of the military. So the military has been brought down under the control of the government, but also that, I think, accelerated the backsliding in some ways, or contributed to the backsliding rather than the other way around.
And then I think the second question had to do with democratic participation, expanding turnout, and encouraging mobilization, etc.
I'll just take a stab at that. First of all, I don't know anybody who really believes in democracy who thinks you should exclude, people who are not elite. That's not a serious position. I think the more, debatable proposition, people who are advocates of turnout as the panacea are often the same people who are just saying, well, let's just double down on our message. Let's appeal to the choir, and that'll be enough. We just get more turnout. And while I think turnout is great, it's a general proposition that we should be promoting it, I don't think it is the panacea. I think that, in this country, there are not enough progressives, even if everybody turns out, to turn back the Trump tide. You have to appeal to the movable middle. And so I think that's what's interesting about Montgomery. Yes, he's turning people out, but he's putting forth a message of affordability that is a very middle class, bread and butter, ordinary citizen message. He's trying to broaden the base of the Democratic Party. And so I think we have to keep that in mind. It's not enough just to stick with what we've always done and mobilize. We've got to find new ways to speak to a broader constituency, which frankly the Democratic Party has done a poor job of doing. It's emerged now as a party of the elite. It's lost the working class. And its existing leadership is not coming up with, meaningful rhetoric that appeals to a broader constituency. So I think that's what we have to look to, not just turnout.
So in a developing country, it's about the cost and benefit analysis of going to the polls, because you work on a daily basis in order to make ends meet, and if you have to travel so far up the mountain, and you have to queue for such a long time under the rain. People will not just decide that it's not worth it, especially if you use that to compare to the benefit of choosing, a politician after a politician that doesn't make any difference. So I feel like that's something that in Thailand and many developing countries that you really have to think about this cost and benefit analysis for the voters. Say that if your vote matters, if you go out and vote and you have a candidate that can make a difference, then no matter what, they will travel back from New York to Bangkok. They will travel from Berlin back to Bangkok or from Tokyo to Bangkok and vote. But if there's no benefit of going to vote and the cost of going is too high, which is by design. The autocrats are trying to make it as far as possible. They're trying to make it on Wednesdays so that you cannot skip work. Those things are piling up. So those are the things that I would worry about. That would be my line of thinking when it comes to participation.
I agree with Ken's comment that I think if somebody is making a statement like that, I think they don't understand what democracy is about. I think it's also important when I think about turnout to remember that franchise is won out of struggles, right? People fought to expand the franchise. They fought to be able to vote. And then if they're not voting now, I think we need to ask ourselves what went wrong, right? What's going on here that people, put their lives at risk to gain the vote, and then they don't show up to vote, and there is now this voter apathy. And I think there was a discussion in the first panel about electoral democracy and rural democracy, and electoral democracy does not make democracy, right? Or it is not I don't think it is a substantive way of thinking about what democracy is. And I think, as the fellow panelists both indicated, it's the message that resonates with people and brings them to the voting booth. It's not the other way of it. Just by voting doesn't make democracy work. I think it's the other way around. The substance is what makes democracy work.
And Pete, I think there was a question specifically for you.
I think it's the other way around. We should be looking at Indonesia for your resilience. Dark Indonesia, and finally some specific reform stopped. So you show resilience in the way you do it. Not just within the past 2 months, but looking back to 1997 when Reformasi happened, and when everything is still militarized back in the days. Your Senate is actually appointed by the military as well, and then SBY came along, a general himself, started to demilitarize politics in Indonesia. So whether it's long term or short term, it's more like we have to learn from you.
And I think there was a direct question about your reflections on your time as campaigning.
No regrets. Very happy with what I had achieved.
Other questions? David? All the way in the back?
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and I have more like a follow-up question to you all when we talk about, especially Mr. Charlie, talk about military power. Sorry. So you talk about the importance of achieving a landslide victory in elections as a way to kind of limit military influence. But however, countries like Indonesia, where the military is deeply embedded in business and economic networks, or Thailand, where even election victories have been created military intervention. How do you see civilian government effectively balancing or reducing the military power impact? I feel like there are a lot more different examples from ASEAN countries that I just want to know more about how you all think about it.
Okay. And David, I think David.
session, the point was made, the observation was made about the value of participating even in managed elections. And so, Peter, I'm curious now. Move Forward, Future Forward have won 2 elections and have been deprived of taking power due to the Constitution. So 2 related questions. One is, I mean, how do you stay mobilized? I mean, is there a risk of, voter fatigue or just voters saying, these guys will never be able to take power? And then 2, I mean, how do you envision it changing so that if there is another electoral victory, you and others can actually form a government?
Form the government.
We want to expand this.
And there another question? Otherwise, right here, Jeff.
Thanks, Margaret. My name is Jeff Sutton. This tails on to that question, which is also about being part of a government that is quasi or fully autocratic in that space, where you're also trying to then contest the next election to build that bridge towards something democratic. And in this case, for you, PETA, in a position where the party is actually a majority party in a non-democratic system, trying to achieve change and still combat voter fatigue. How do you avoid voters feeling like you become complicit in the system that you're trying to change?
So I think the first question I heard from the back, I heard Indonesia, I heard Thailand, I heard civilian government, I heard military, and I heard business. So maybe you're asking about how a civilian government can balance between the governance of the country versus these interests. Is that correct? So that's essentially what we campaign on. Our campaign was summarized into 3 Ds: demilitarize, demonopolize, and decentralize Thailand. I think that answers the second question in one go. That's sort of our alternative version of what Thailand could look like to the audience, and that gives politics some sensation that people started to finally understand that if you demilitarize, allocate the budget into environmental problems and aging society and digital disruption, people started to understand what it means. Demonopolize is to make sure that the barrier to entry for SMEs are no longer there, and decentralize is to make sure that Bangkok is not Thailand and Thailand is not Bangkok. 50% of the GDP and the budget is within Bangkok, so when COVID hits, then the country becomes paralyzed. What I wish I would do more, actually I have an answer to you now. I wish I explained this more, that it's not just for the progressives that think like this. Even if you own a large business in Thailand, there's something in it for you as well as inclusive growth. You have a better labor market, you have a larger domestic market like Indonesia, so that you don't have to export your products all the time. So when President Trump slapped the tariff at you, you have that diversification. So those are the things that I try to do, have a platform, but then also try to explain what's in it for you in my platform in order to move the country, move the party forward. So to correct you, we won only one time. The first time, Future Forward Party got 80 out of 500. So about almost like 20%. The second time we won 40% of the votes. Succession planning. When we found the first movement, we said 4 elections, 16 years. So when we calculate, we don't calculate election per election. We calculate in terms of next 2 decades. And we understand that it's not going to happen overnight. And we'll give ourselves maybe 4 elections, which is 16 years. If we fail, we'll pass it on to the next. We've passed the baton to the next election. But in the second time, then we won already. But it has to keep going, and the fatigue is definitely there. So it's not going to be an easy thing. And it has to be the campaign 24/7, 365. So it's not like 3 months before the election and you have some endorsement and you have Beyonce with you and have such a changing appearance, party of the elite kind of thing, whether it's Democratic Party or our party, you have to have some grassroots and you have to be there all the time. Election season is 4 years in a row, so it's not just going to be like 200 days before the election days. That would be my take for those 3 questions.
Let me try to address both. Let me push it in the back. And then I think your question is really about corporate capture. You know, if you have an elite that dominates the government, how do you push back when they seem powerful? And I think the answer to that is to show how this capture of government is not serving ordinary people. And corruption is often by far and away the most powerful way to do that. And corruption are not necessarily people, immediately putting the money in their pocket, but basically paying off their cronies, finding the preferred beneficiaries of government projects. And so, this is a big problem that Orban has in Hungary today, where he was getting these big European Union subsidies. What was he using them for? To build football stadiums, to pay off his cronies. Meanwhile, medical care in Hungary is abysmal. And people saw that connection. It had to be pointed out. But this is a very useful antidote. Something similar is going on in Egypt, where Sisi is building this huge administrative capital outside of Cairo. Who needs this? Nobody. But it's a way to pay off basically the military and their construction contractors, including the military dominates. And again, ordinary Egyptians can't afford bread. Today there are big protests in Morocco because the government is building these stadiums for the World Cup. It's coming up. Morocco's going to be a co-host. And basic social services are lacking in Morocco. So, it's always useful to look at the construction, because construction tends to be dominated by government. It's a way to pay off cronies. It's easy to find money to your friends. And that really pisses people off when they realize that that's where the money is being spent and not on what they need. What to do when the government completely dominates? And is that a point of despair, or is there anything that can be done? I actually think that there's a good lesson to be drawn from what Navalny did in Russia, where there were no independent candidates. Everybody who was independent had been dismissed long ago. And what Navalny did, one of his geniuses beyond, in a very funny, humorous way, pointing out the government's corruption, but he developed this voting system where in each constituency, they would figure out who was the least bad candidate. They were all bad. Nobody was good. But which one was least attuned to Putin? Which one might have a smidgen of independence to them? And he would urge everybody to vote for that person. And it was a way of repudiating Putin, even though you don't get a good legislature out of this. But it's just a way of slapping Putin, which is mobilizing. People loved it. They got Navalny killed. But this is a very powerful tool. So I think we shouldn't treat winning the election as the only option. There are very important intermediate steps which are mobilizing, which clearly the government hates and feels the sting from. And you've got to take kind of a multi-election, multi-year approach to ultimately regaining power.
The question about elections and defeating elections as kind of demobilizing and demoralizing the opposition, like that has been the case in Turkey. AKP has been in power for almost 25 years now, and there has been, I guess, between general and municipal elections, probably a dozen of them, and there have been contested elections, although they are managed and sometimes beyond managed. But each time there's great mobilization around elections, and then there's division and factionalism within the opposition. The opposition runs against each other, and then there's electoral defeat, and there's really this defeatism and great demoralization. So I think elections can be really useful as focal points for mobilizing and for and they are unpredictable, those momentums can then turn into something else. But it's not also be all, what's that saying? Be all and all. Yeah, be all and all. I think it needs to be seen as part of that package, and especially where in context where there has already been losses, like in terms of the judiciary, in terms of the university, other institutions have already been kind of shelled out. I think it's important to think about a multifaceted strategy that is not just solely focused on elections, and that also not make the elections so central that you feel so defeated when you lose an election.
So?
Thank you. My question is, firstly directed to Ken, but of course, if others would like to respond, that would be great. When you were talking earlier about the question of shaming, right, being effective before Trump, the context had been in the past a situation where democracy was more or less the name of the game, and that's shifted now. So my question is, what about authoritarian solidarity that we've been seeing? Orban, Trump, Millet, Bukele, you can add the there. And how they also copying from one another, and how do we need to now adjust our strategies and tactics in this global situation where the norms are shifting rightwards. And I can also give you an example from Southeast Asia, where there has been a club of authoritarians covering each other's asses. It's called ASEAN. Right? So it has been extremely difficult for civil society and pro-democracy forces within ASEAN, actually. And thank goodness Timor-Leste is now coming in as probably the sole democracy left standing, you know. So anyway, new tactics under these more illiberal, in this illiberal global context.
Other questions? Oh, okay. So we'll start in the back and work our way around.
Wait, in the back.
Right with you, and then we'll go on it. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think we've been talking a lot about like kind of freedom since in the morning, and I just see a lot of like huge gaps, especially in Thailand. Since I'm from Thailand, and there's a huge gap between like academics and politics and policy making, and I'm just wondering from everyone's point of view, how can we bridge that gap, and how can academics be more informative of like policy making, and on the other way around, how politics could be more like supportive of like academic and research in Thailand and also beyond in other countries. And also another thing is that like, since we talk a lot about like democracy, and like I'm just curious how everyone see the future of democracy in your country and also as a global democracy. And are you hopeful about it? What do you think it will, what do you envision it to be?
And Margaret, right behind you, Morgana.
So when you're talking about the future, like I want to talk about the recent past. You know, you all remember that in 2024 we had the year of elections, right? It was 64 countries, and half of the world was actually going to the polls, right, and voting, including the three of the biggest democracies, so Indonesia, India, and the US. And so I'm wondering if there were any election results that surprised you, where you felt like you didn't see that coming, or that maybe the ruling party that was pushed out or not pushed out might have been surprised as well. Because one of the features of non-democratic countries is that, or regimes, sorry, government, is that they're usually quite badly informed, and sometimes they can be surprised by election results. That's been the case in Myanmar, for instance, where, or by opposition to election results, right? So any surprises from that year of the elections that we had in 2024 that you feel we might learn from going forwards in future elections?
And can we get one more right up here?
Just one right
Oh, yep.
So this is to Peter. You know, with what's your take on ASEAN? It's very connected to Seoul because the Burmese military, of course, you know, looks at ASEAN and it's like, oh, it's a joke, and that's literally what they think. I mean, there are all these like 5-point consensus. It's all BS to them, and with the U.S. retreating, right, and the United States has always been, oh, you know, on the case of Burma, will wait to hear from ASEAN. But we also know that ASEAN won't do anything as of now. And so what, if you have the power, what would you see, what would you like to see ASEAN moving, right, and evolving?
Kick out Burma.
Yeah, already there.
If I were the Prime Minister of Thailand right now, I would turn 5-point consensus into a 5-year roadmap. 5-year roadmap with the right incentive and the right pressure so that the people of Myanmar will come together to the table and decide. But because it's 5-year consensus, because of non-interference principle that we have, so we are no longer relevant and no longer credible. If you want ASEAN to be credible on anything, then it has to be practical steps where there's a timeline in order for you to succeed. So 5-year consensus into a 5-year roadmap, organization structure ready for a troika, continuation to it, expand the mandate of ASEAN section, so they're not just a day-to-day operation. I think that will change Myanmar for the better. The first question I'm not going to answer. I want to hear Ken answer as well. Election results that surprised me was Sri Lanka and Moldova. Two elections that surprised me. I think that would be me. I don't want to monopolize. Maybe you can answer the first one.
Well, let me just add on ASEAN after this with a bit of trepidation because I'm not an expert. But part of the problem is I think ASEAN tries to monopolize the field. So everybody says, oh, ASEAN's dealing with the Southeast Asian issue, and nobody else gets involved, which then means nothing happens because ASEAN is dominated by a combination of non-interference principle and its consensus orientation. The other problem is the way ASEAN members treat ASEAN, because it should be a floor, not a ceiling. So there's a common ASEAN position, fine, everybody is valuable. But what is to stop Singapore and Malaysia or the Philippines from taking a tougher position with respect to Myanmar? Nothing, other than the fact that they hide behind this consensus as a ceiling when it should only be. And so I think that there are things that can be done without changing the ASEAN charter, which probably not easy to do, which nonetheless would push ASEAN a bit to the side and allow either individual members or external forces to play a more active role. On the question of elections that went well, I guess I'd cite Brazil got rid of Bolsonaro, Poland got rid of the Law and Justice Party. These were big things. Brazil was very much a defensive democracy. Poland, it was a lesson, I think, on the usefulness of a broad coalition. So they all just kind of forgot about their differences because the most important thing was stopping the autocratic tendency of law and justice, and that worked. It's now kind of a game plan that's being followed in both Hungary and Turkey, and I think it may work very well. If you look more broadly at, I know the common wisdom is democracy is in decline today, and I actually think that that's a very Western perspective. Because if you look at the established democracies, there's no question that there's this growing appeal on the far right. And I think that the reason for that is that there is a significant segment of society, call it, in each country, the ethnic majority working class, that feels the government is not certain. They're economically stagnating, they're facing growing inequality, they're not heard or respected by government, and these are the people who are ripe for the autocrat's appeal. But if you look at the rest of the world, there is considerable evidence that people want democracy. We've seen these huge pro-democracy demonstrations that sometimes work. I think that's one way to understand Sri Lanka. It's what happened with getting rid of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh. It's what stopped the constitutional coup in South Korea. Most recently, it's why the governments in Nepal and Madagascar were ousted. Not so much that they were anti-democratic, but that they shot protesters, and that was just the end. They're gone, So the flip side is that there are certain, you can sometimes have protests, and the government is repressive, and they can crush them. That was Hong Kong, that was Iran, Russia, Belarus, So you don't always prevail. But what's become quite clear is that people want democracy in in much of the world. The people who have lived under autocracy want power. And I take heart from that. So I actually don't think that we're in a moment where democracy is losing its appeal. People want governments that is accountable to them. They want government that they can influence and push to serve them. And it's actually been the inability of government in the established democracies to serve a significant segment of society that is creating this democratic crisis in the West. But this is something that can be reversed by getting government to better serve people. Not the Trump-like response, which is to pretend to serve people and really serve themselves, but rather to put forward a Mamdani type response where you're just proposing a program that would actually serve people. Whether it accomplishes it or not, different thing. But I think that that is the key to kind of reviving democracy and then the established democracies as well.
And did you really address Saul's question? Did you feel like he addressed your question or not? I kind of feel like not.
I was wondering maybe actually if Ashley would have something to say about the authoritarian solidarity question.
I want to first say something about the elections that have surprised me, which are 2 weeks away. I think I wouldn't foresee that program will, not just have a chance, but is most likely to be elected as the mayor of New York. And I think, thinking about Istanbul and Imamoglu and Turkey, it seems to me that maybe we need to kind of like shift our attention away from national and general elections to these like more local and other scales where politics is, playing out in a different way. There are different kinds of coalitions to be made and different kinds of politics and policies could be promised and hopefully implemented in terms of, things that touch people's lives in a much more direct way. And that's how Erdogan first emerged as mayor of Istanbul, right? That's his origin story, and maybe that's why he was so worried about Imamoglu as the rival. The autocrat solidarity, I don't know. I don't really have a specific comment. I don't know. I don't know if that's like where we need to focus our attention to. I think we need to focus our attention to who our allies are and how do we build a movement. And I don't know politics of that would be, but I think this is much more concrete and tangible.
Let me try to more directly answer your question. I just wouldn't overstate this autocrats in a self-defense context. Of course it's there. But I think at the recent Shanghai Cooperation Agreement Organization conference, and so who did Putin and Xi have to put up on the stage? Kim Jong-un. What an act of desperation. And so I guess there's not that much there. Yes, Malay is now being supported, but Scott Bessent is being beaten up because it's basically, while they're cutting healthcare in this country, while they're cutting food stamps, while they're cutting education, he's going to spend $40 billion basically to bail out his hedge fund friends who bet badly on Argentine bonds. That's what this is about. And he's getting lambasted for that appropriately. So I just, yes, of course, the autocrats look out for each other. This has always happened. I think they're much weaker than they seem.
We cannot forget the second question of the
Oh, yes,
timekeeper.
yes.
We gotta respect the labor rights law and compensator. Your question was about the gap between academics and policy, right?
Yes.
I made them join my party. They're my deputy now. So that's the answer. So I invite people in academics to join politics and make it easier for them. So now they're my deputy party on policy design.
Well, so maybe I could expand that a little bit. So is part of, arguably there is a, I don't know how to frame it exactly, but there's many academics have, politics is dirty. Politics is messy. Politics is something you want to keep at arm's length. until it rises up and bites you in the ass, right? Which has come with cuts in funding and attacks on, and so I think part of this, expanding this question more broadly, one is academics being involved in policy, providing advice, trying to influence policy, and the other is academics kind of perhaps breaking the impartial, objective, academic neutrality view to say, you know, for me to do my work effectively, I actually have to be involved in politics. Like, this is a time that requires me to be involved in politics. Beyond perhaps simply the area where I have expertise to kind of influence policy, but more broadly to institutionally defend check and balances and the institutional integrity of my workplace. So just wondering if there's like some thoughts on that. Yeah.
Let me add to that. I'm in my third year as an academic. You know, I totally don't belong. But the you know, to get tenure, which I think you're less about, you have to, you know, write for academic journals. If you write, you know, op-eds and policy pieces, you're popular. That's disparaged. And you don't, not only do you not get credit for that, you probably get demerits. And I think that, you know, that has to change. I mean, especially foremost in a public policy school. You know, but you know, it's because, you know, the last round of academics went through this. They feel like you have to do it too. It's a rite of passage. But it guarantees your relevance because you're writing for these journals that 5 people will read. You know, you're using these databases because that's supposed to be more scientific, it's statistically accurate, even though the databases have the poorest possible correlation with reality. And I see this in human rights where they come up with these databases about, you know, incidents of torture mentioned in the State Department country reports, as if that has anything to do with anything. And then they make all of these, you know, causation, you know, analogies to that. And it's just, you know, I wish people would just get out of their office, go into the field, interview people, and like talk about, you know, what actually happened and what do you think caused something? You know, what would you think would make a difference? You know, but that requires the discomfort of leaving the office, traveling to a country you may not know. You know, it's a little bit harder. But you know, sadly, academia today discourages that and wants you just to do these, you know, database analyses, which are more scientific and more your own.
I imagine you have some opinions on this also.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I agree. But again, also going back to my earlier point, I think 7% of faculty now are contingent faculty, HR and contract faculty. So tenure track lines are now a third of faculty lines. So that is a minority. People who have to be on tenure track are publishing in these like niche journals and doing very specific researches. A minority of the faculty and a majority of the faculty are struggling to survive, honestly. Like, they are worried about bread and water issues and they are trying to, you know, teach 10 classes and get by. So there's that. And I think, but I agree with Ken's point about, I think there's a longer discussion to be had about transformations that happened within the academia over the span of, at least 30, 40 years, and some of that was about area studies and defunding area studies and people not being able to go into the field, not having the grants, not speaking the languages, increasing quantification of social sciences and, you know, people studying social sciences in computer labs instead of going into the field and meeting people and, you know, touching these places and people. So there's that part of it. And I think there's the commercialization of the university. And I think in the very first panel, I think Leo mentioned this duality in the very identity of the university between its function as kind of like reproducing the status quo and maintaining the status quo, and then also it being the site where it can be challenged and critiqued and undermined and maybe, I don't know, reimagined and remade. And I think that that tension is very much present today. I think there's administrators, people who are really, you know, necessarily fixated on tenured clerks and publishing, and they are very much involved in this reproduction function of the university. And I think we need to build this other function. And I think I forgot to answer your earlier question, John, about students. And I think students push us to do that, very much so, partly because they also have to go to the real world and find jobs, and they end up with thousands of dollars of debt. They come out from NYU, they come out with one of the highest debts in the country, and also because I think there are new generations of students who are much better connected and in tune with their peers across the country, around the world, and are pushing us to focus on this other mission of New York as the place of critique and reconstruction and reimagining, and I don't know how that connects to the policy question, but I think maybe producing policymakers and connecting to the policy world is a little too much in that reproducing function, and I think maybe there are other ways to think about the mission of the university that's not necessarily so reproductive.
So your question was about how to recruit academics into politics, correct?
Yes.
A lot of
Or to engage
structured talent pipeline management, lots of negotiations to understand their perceived risk and take away all the risk for them, and some alibi. So for example, instead of coming into the public office right away, then you have a think tank for the party and keep them there for a few years until they feel a bit more confident. If they're a mid-age, professors, they have 2 children, and if they run the election and if they lose, they don't have any places to go and things like that. You have to have some alumni management for them to have some platform for them to keep going in terms of politics. Because if you step out of the academics into politics and to return, it's quite complicated. So you got to think in a structural term, behavioral term, and also some alibi on the way.
Great, so I think we're coming up on time. So I was going to ask each of our panelists to take just a minute or two and kind of reflecting on some of the broader themes that we've talked about. Kind of, if you wanted people to have one specific or two, we can allow 2 takeaways for people to bring with themselves as they enjoy some food and drink momentarily, and afterwards what those might be. And Austin, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I'm a stranger to the field of scientific studies, so my interest here is much more on academic freedom and university, and so I'll conclude with a total of that. I think I already made the points pretty precisely, I hope, but we need to really build coalitions. We need to really organize wherever you are. If you are in the academia or if you are outside the academia, I don't know, think about what are feasible ways to build such coalitions with other people in your communities, in your universities, and with the students. The students have been really at the forefront, and especially with the Gaza Solidarity, Palestine Solidarity movement, and they've gotten the dire repercussions of that. And I think that's a much more productive place to start rather than thinking in abstract terms and thinking about, much higher level generalizations, like where we are and where we can start building coalitions. And I'll finish with the plug. We have a town hall next Tuesday, and I mean, I am trying to do what I preach. And the town hall is for colleagues, all academic workers, including staff, faculty, graduate student workers, postdocs, researchers, from CUNY, Columbia, Barnard, Rutgers, New School, NYU, and a whole bunch of other, I think over a dozen different colleges and universities to come together, to start talking to each other and to organize together. So I think this is something very much more feasible that we can start thinking about in terms of defending academic freedom and defending our universities. Thank you.
Let me just say that think if we are going to successfully defend academic freedom, we have to broaden the universe. And partly that means getting universities not to just fight for themselves, but to band together, which they've been particularly poor about doing in the face of Trump's attacks. But it also means better articulating why universities matter to everybody. And universities are an elite endeavor. Even the number of people who get undergraduate degrees are a minority of Americans. Those who pursue graduate degrees are a much smaller number. And so why should the ordinary non-degree holding American care? And I think we have to do a better job of advertising that. That it is one route to the scientific or medical progress that benefits all of us. Within the realm of democracy, universities are repositories of expertise and knowledge that are critical to constraining and push back against governmental oversteps. And these serve the defense of democracy that benefits everybody. So I think we have to kind of think in those terms, so we're not just speaking to other professors and other students, but to a broader public as to why they should care about the health of our universities.
Radical optimism. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's a good day to be in New York, and I'm super excited with what's going on today, tomorrow, and the next day. It's monumental. I mean, if you look back 50 years from now and you look back about what's happening today and how I'm spending the day here, it's monumental for me. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So before I ask you to join me in thanking our panelists, our own little piece of propaganda, be sure to check the NISIAN website. A number of the issues that have been raised all day today and in this panel. We have 2 events on Thailand coming up in the next 2 weeks, and a film screening in the middle of November, and we're already starting to plan activities for the spring, so please go to the website, become a member, check out events that are coming up. But otherwise, please join me in thanking, first of all, Margaret, Sydney, Eve, Anne-Marie, Rianne, and the rest of the NISIAN coordinating committee, and then of course our invaluable coordinator, Emily Tamale, who keeps herds, cats, and all running together, and our team of volunteers who are gathering the food and drink for us as we speak. And thank, of course, for all of the presenters. This has been a really wonderful way to spend a somewhat cloudy Friday. And please join me in thanking our panelists and stay around for a celebration.
Yeah, I can report it. Yes, I can report Din.
NYU
เข้าใกล้กว่านี้เลย
3, 2, 1 ขอบีบเข้ามาหน่อยได้ไหมครับ 3, 2, 1 last one please 2, 1อันนี้เป็นใครเราจะเป็นวายุครับเหมือนกันเป็นแกรสเตอร์ผมอายุเยอะแล้วผมอยู่ได้เจอกันที่ สอบแล้วผมไม่รู้ได้ไม่หยุดผมไม่รู้เยอะขนาดนี้เลยอันนี้คือมาแบบตอนนี้ที่พี่มาเรียนใช่ทำไมถึงพี่อยากมาเรียนแต่ว่าพี่ทำงานมาก่อนที่ไม่ได้ที่เนี่ยใช่ที่แรกก็มาถามพี่ว่าก็เลยอายุเยอะแล้วเรียนตามเด็กไม่ถึงช่วยถ่าย
ไม่เป็นไรขอบใจมากๆจ้า
เดี๋ยวไปกันไปก็ได้
Yep, sure. คนไทยเหรอรีเสิร์ชก็อยู่ที่อื่นเนี่ยถ้าเกิดเราเป็นรัฐบาลเราเอาเลยก็ industry แล้วก็ start อันนี้คนไม่ว่าจะอยู่ที่ประเทศญี่ปุ่นเราได้กันหมดเพื่อเสียดายโอกาสนั้นมากพอดีผมมีงานต่อ
คุณทีมกลับบอสตันคืนนี้ไหมคะ
ครับผมวันสองวันเดี๋ยวก็ไปแล้วครับ
แล้ววันอังคาร
รูปไปกันไหมก็ถ่ายรูปไปด้วยเชิญ
โอ้ค่ะ
ไม่อยากถ่ายจำไม่ได้แล้วไม่อยากถ่ายใช่ไหม
ค่ะ
โอเคแล้วนั่งมองเลยนะครับ
Alright, so I'm taking a few moments here. The space will go to 108.
คุณทิมอยู่ในห้องนั้นแล้วนะคะ ขอบคุณนะคะที่มาชมไลฟ์นี้ให้ป้าบังเอิญโทรศัพท์ป้ามันแบตจะหมดอยู่แล้ว เพราะว่าป้าก็เพิ่งรู้ค่ะว่าคุณทิมป้าก็เพิ่งรู้ว่าคุณทิมมาที่อายุเมื่อไม่กี่นาที ป้าก็เลยให้ลูกสาวป้ารีบลงทะเบียนให้ป้าก็นั่งซับเวย์มาดีที่ป้าดีที่ว่าป้ามาทันตอนคุณทิมยังไม่พูดสงสัยคุณทิมทำอะไรต่อก็ไม่รู้ค่ะหล่อตัวจริงหล่อจริงๆที่ป้าไม่กล้าให้เห็นคนที่มาพูดด้วยอ่ะเพราะว่ามันคล้ายๆมันจะละเมิดบ้างค่ะป้าก็เลยให้เห็นแต่คุณทิมเคยมีคนคอมเมนต์มาบอกว่าป้าน่าจะให้เห็นคนอื่นๆด้วยแต่ป้าให้เห็นไม่ได้อะค่ะแสดงว่าคุณทิมมีสัมภาษณ์นะเนี่ยงั้นป้าจะนั่งอยู่ในนี้อีกแล้วป้าก็จะอาศัยชาร์จแบตแล้วก็จะรอจนคุณทิมกลับป้าไลฟ์ช่องนี้มีน้องอะไรนะที่อยู่อังกฤษค่ะมาให้กำลังใจอยู่คนเดียวมาชมคุณทิมไหมคะป้าก็เลยลองไลฟ์อีกช่องหนึ่งช่องนั้นนะคะคนเข้ามาดูไลฟ์เยอะเลยแต่ว่าไอช่องเนี้ยป้าใช้ไม้หนีบโทรศัพท์มันก็เลยนิ่งแล้วคราวนี้โทรศัพท์ป้ามันจะหมดทั้ง2เครื่องเลยอ่ะเพราะถ้าป้ารู้ว่าคุณทิมมาวันนี้ที่นี่นะมีน้องคอมเมนต์ไปบอกว่าคุณทิมมานิวยอร์กวันนี้แต่น้องไม่ได้บอกป้าเข้าไปดูในต่อเห็นปุ๊บป้ารีบบอกลูกสาวลงทะเบียนให้เพราะที่ NYU นี้ถ้าเราไม่มี ID เข้าไม่ได้นะคะ บังเอิญพอลงทะเบียนแล้วป้าก็โชว์ไอดีคือตอนลงทะเบียนเนี่ยเขาก็บอกชื่อเราอยู่แล้วเลยค่ะป้าก็เลยเข้าได้นี่หล่อตัวจริงอะหล่อตัวเล็กๆหุ่นคุณทิมเหมาะกับการเป็นดาราเลยนะคะเพราะว่าจะไม่ล้นจอยค่ะตัวจริงหล่อกว่าในจอนะคงร้อนละสิคุณทิมคงร้อนป้านึกว่าคุณทิมจะไปโคลัมเบียด้วยเดี๋ยวเมื่อกี้ได้ยินคุณทิมพูดกับน้องนักศึกษาว่าทางทางโคลัมเบียก็เชิญแต่คุณทิมไม่มีเวลาโอ้โหเท่จังนั่นแหละแอคชั่นนั่นแหละแอคชั่นเป็นไลฟ์ที่นานที่สุดปกติคุณทิมจะพูดประมาณชั่วโมงหนึ่งเขามีเครื่องดื่มมีอะไรให้กินทางนู้นนะคะแต่ป้าไม่ไปแอบดู NYU เป็นมหาวิทยาลัยที่อยู่กลางเมืองอย่างโคลัมเบียเนี่ยอยู่นอกออกไปทางบรอนซ์นะคะเสร็จแล้วมั้งแน่คุณทิมเดินออกมาแล้วนะคุณทิมคะวันอังคารคุณทิมมาอีกใช่ไหมคะไม่แล้วเหรอฮะอ๋อคุณทิมไปห้องน้ำค่ะอ้าวป้านึกว่าวันอังคารคุณทิมมานิวยอร์กอีกนะทิมไปห้องน้ำค่ะโอ้ยถ้าอย่างนั้นทำไมป้าจะได้รูปกับคุณทิมอย่างวันนั้นที่เฮ้ย8ป้ามันจะหมดนะสิถ้าอย่างนั้นพอคุณทิมมาแล้วป้าปิดไลฟ์นะคะแล้วว่าป้าจะถ่ายคลิปที่คุณทิมเดินออกไปค่ะคุณทิมสงสัยคุณทิมไปไปเพนสเตชันเลยอ่ะคงคิดว่าใช่อ่ะคงไปเพนสเตชันเลยถ้าป้ารู้นะป้าจะชาร์จแบตให้เต็มโทรศัพท์ป้าทุกเครื่องเลยอ่ะแต่ป้าเพิ่งรู้
You're live streaming everything?
Oh yeah.
Are we famous in Thailand right now? Are we famous in Thailand right now?
Yes.
Yeah, we are.
Mm-hmm. ป้าถ่ายรูปกับคุณทิมด้วยดีกว่าป้าจะถ่ายรูปกับคุณทิมเดี๋ยวก่อนหยิบโทรศัพท์ก่อนฮะดูสิเครื่องนี้ป้าเหลืออยู่20%นั่นนะคะ
He's coming in 3 minutes. He's a wrapping up the conversation.
โทรศัพท์ป้าแบตหมดแล้ว แดงแล้วค่ะ ถ้าอย่างนั้นนะป้าปิดไลฟ์ก่อนนะคะ แต่ป้าก็จะนั่งรอคุณทิมอยู่ตรงเนี้ยไหนป้าชะโงกดูก่อนว่าคุณทิมทำอะไร ในนั้น อันนี้มองไม่เห็นค่ะ งั้นป้าปิดไลฟ์ก่อนนะคะ ขอบคุณมากๆค่ะ โทรศัพท์ป้ามันแดงแล้วแบตมันแดงป้าจะแอบชาร์จไม่ต้องแอบค่ะ ชาร์จอยู่ตรงแถวเนี้ยรู้สึกป้าเห็นที่ชาร์จแล้ว นี่ ใช่ด้วย ขอบคุณมากๆนะคะ แล้วป้าจะติดตามข่าวน้องๆทางเมืองไทยถ้ารู้ส่งข่าวบอกป้าด้วยว่าคุณทิมไปงานที่ไหน จริงแล้ววันอังคารนะคะคุณทิมต้องมานิวยอร์กอีกนะ แต่ไม่มาซะแล้วสิ ป้าถามเมื่อกี้คุณทิมบอกไม่ได้มาแล้ว ขอบคุณมากๆป้าปิดไลฟ์ก่อนนะคะ ขอให้ทุกคนมีสุขภาพแข็งแรง มีความสุขมากๆนะคะ สวัสดีค่ะ